My name's Amata, and this Red Gamer Tech video, I'm here with the latest and greatest from the tech world, as per usual. A little smattering of something else at the end, as I do tend to do sometimes. However, what do I have for you today? Well, I have ASRock outing some Raven Ridge BIOS updates for their AM4 motherboards. We have an update from Qualcomm as to what they're doing, and they are supplying a massive number of Snapdragon 850s to various phone manufacturers. And speaking of phones, we also have the iBoot source code for Apple being released to the public, which could have, shall we say, interesting ramifications. Steam Audio has introduced AMD True Audio support, which is pretty damn cool. And to round things out, we have Sweden joining the list of countries investigating whether or not they classify loot boxes and as gambling. So let's begin things with ASRock. So this is a fairly sweet and simple one, as ASRock did announce today that they have posted various BIOS updates for their AM4 motherboard product lineup, and this enables the APUs based on the Raven Ridge Silicon, which are of course Ryzen 3 2200G and Ryzen 5 2400G APUs. Now they have posted BIOS updates for all 18 of the AM4 motherboard models, based on X370, B350 and A320 chipsets. If you happen to have any of these and you want to get your hands on that BIOS update, it is of course on the download section of your motherboard model product page on the ASRock website. Oh, and one last related AMD thing, as AMD is trying to make our lives a little bit easier, as they have standardised a new label for use by motherboard manufacturers to basically put on their box to denote whether or not this particular motherboard will support AMD Ryzen 2000 series processor out of the box on the newer 300 series chipset motherboards. So if you're buying a motherboard out of those ones and it doesn't have that label, it does mean it won't support the 2200G or 2400G out of the box and will require a BIOS update. It's not a huge thing, but it is just like a nice thing to say, hey, you don't have to worry about it, no BIOS updates, no tinkering, to worry about if you're perhaps, a little bit new to PC gaming and you're afraid to build your rig for you or whatever, and you don't want to have to worry about any of that, you just want to build the thing and have it go, then obviously it is nice to know. Just a nice little sort of quality of life thing that is always appreciated, I find. Anything to make the buying process easier, considering the amount of choice there is available on the market, I think is always something to be celebrated, even if it's like a polite golf club, like, well done chaps, well done. So, let's move on to Qualcomm, shall we? And I must say, I can't say that word without feeling like I've said it weird or said it wrong, but I don't really know how else you'd say it. Anyway, you may have recalled the rumours recently that Apple has been foregoing the use of Qualcomm connectivity modems this year, but that isn't stopping Qualcomm at all, as no less than 19 OEMs are going to make use of the Snapdragon X50 modem in their mobile devices lined up for 2019 release. Now, this is according to Qualcomm. Unfortunately, they didn't provide any details, so we don't know what devices are going to be using the X50. Obviously, this is going to be revealed by the manufacturers when they're going, hey, look at our specs, look how amazing it is. Oh, it also makes use of Snapdragon 850, all that sort of stuff. Now, some of the names, however, floating around, the companies rather than the devices, I said I don't know the devices, but we do know some of the companies, and these are not exactly small change by any means. You've got HTC, Asus, LG, Sony, ZTE, and Xiaomi. So, just some small companies, your local family-run affair. But obviously, we don't know the full list of what phones are going to be making use of this for now, but it just shows that, even given their recent troubles that I discussed, and I'll put a link to that in the description below, perhaps in the comments, depending on if I'm feeling fruity or not, and obviously the fact that Apple is rumoured to be dumping them, Qualcomm are simply taking all this in stride and being like, yep, you know what, all the things can use our stuff. Now, obviously, if Apple decide not to use them, if that rumour is indeed true, that obviously would be a big hit to them, because, well, it is Apple, but, they're not exactly the only one on the market, even if they do eat up a large chunk of it. So, you might say, okay, what does this actually mean? Well, the X50 modem is basically going to enable 5G connections on the first compatible devices, so more download speed, data capacity, lower latency, and is probably going to improve the whole browsing experience on smartphones, which of course has become a huge part of everyday use for a lot of people if you have a half-decent smartphone. Most people are like, oh, back in the day, if you had a conversation like, oh my god, what actor is, what film have I seen that actor in before? Oh, it's really annoying me. Oh, no one here knows? Okay, nowadays you obviously pull out your phone about, I'm going to go onto IMDb and check, oh look, it's it's so-and-so, he was in this film from 1975. I don't know what that voice was, by the way, but, you know, that's the voice of someone that pulls their phone out during a film, I guess. Anyway, let's turn off Tangent Lane and go back onto the main road, which, of course, is going to lead us next to the Apple iBoot source code being released to the public. So, it's not much of a secret, it's a very open secret if it's even defined as a secret, that Apple loves their walled gardens when it comes to their smartphones and of course their Mac OS. I was going to say PCs, I guess that's technically correct, but whatever, I don't want to get bogged down in semantics quite yet. However, someone has decided that they want to open up the gate on that walled garden and has released the source code for the iOS iBoot Online, which could open up potentially iPhones to simpler jailbreaks and of course a bunch of other hacks. Now this code was published on GitHub and was available for public viewing for several hours before Apple was like, oh dear, and filed a copyright takedown request and had the code pulled. Now what's actually kind of interesting is that the DMCA notice, which obviously had the code removed from the website, does also verify that the code was actually genuine. So if anyone actually managed to get their hands on it before it was pulled, now they know for sure that, yep, this is the real deal, alright. So that's a interesting, slightly ironic turn of events, I'm sure you'll agree. However, I might be getting a bit ahead of myself here because undoubtedly some of you are going, wait, back up. What is iBoot? Basically, its job is, as a part of the iOS operating system, it loads the remainder of the OS into memory. So basically, it's like the BIOS of a PC, but unlike a PC, which will boot any OS or software it can, iBoot is designed to check that the kernel of the OS is signed by Apple, basically saying, yep, this is genuine and it hasn't been modified, you know, it's not been rooted or anything like that, to use Android terms or anything like that. So, if someone does have their hands on this code, then it is possible, because again, it was up for several hours before being pulled, they could potentially, you know, get rid of that from this and, you know, have their own sort of homebrew OS or improvements to it or whatever. However, there is a small sort of upside, not upside, but a sort of, hey, this isn't as bad as it could be kind of thing for Apple, as that this code that was posted was for iOS 9, which obviously is a fair few behind the iOS 11, which is currently running around. However, it's not exactly a surprise either to say that there's a lot of shared code and similar methodologies behind developing for iOS 9 and iOS 11 when it comes to iBoot. So, yeah, while this might mean some extra work for some enterprising, you know, hacker or, you know, jailbreaker or whatever, it's not like it's written in a different language, it is just a bit behind the times, I guess you could say. And obviously I've already spoken about the fact that this could lead to jailbreaks and other such things, but obviously there is an interesting possibility that could take place outside of the iPhone ecosystem, which of course is emulation and maybe even a creation of a sort of virtual machine. That's not quite the right term because obviously we are talking about a smartphone here, but it is obviously the most closest relevant one. And that could obviously lead to some really interesting things. So if you've got a sort of quote-unquote virtual machine of sorts on, you know, you'll say your Android phone or something like that, it obviously could be heavily modified and just basically be like your own OS, you know, built on the back of what they have there. So obviously this is all potential, but Apple are definitely aware of the fact that there's undoubtedly a few people who managed to get their hands on it before this was actually realised by them and obviously pulled. And what's even more interesting is that this isn't actually the first time it happened. A Reddit user posted it a while back, but the user was new, so most people went, that's not legit, and ignored it, but maybe not. Maybe not. It's entirely possible that it wasn't. So yeah, Apple are definitely sweating a little bit, you know, dabbing their head with a flannel, going, oh, this could be bad. And a lot of people who would do the homebrews are going, ooh, this could be good. So it's definitely going to be interesting. Obviously, it's hard to say whether or not anyone did grab it. Obviously, it's entirely possible that it wasn't grabbed, but I don't think that's very likely to you. So we might not even see anything result with this. It might just sit there on someone's computer and they might never do anything with it, or we could see bad things come out of this, we see good things come out of this. We just don't know, unfortunately. As per usual, Mystic Mega's nowhere to be found, so it's hard to say, but it has a lot of potential, a lot of interesting stuff, some of it good, some of it bad. Obviously, there's a lot of bad opportunities as well, but obviously, let's not get out the doom bells just yet. So let's move on to our second from last topic, which of course is regarding Steam Audio. And this is going to be a little bit of a quick one as well, but basically the TLDR is that Valve announced earlier on this week that with the release of Steam Audio 2.0 Beta 13, we also have support for AMD's True Audio Next sound tech. So what does this actually mean? Well, there's going to be a link in the description to Steam Audio's page because it's probably a piece of tech that is a little bit under the radar for some people, so go give that a read if you're at all curious. But basically this will allow developers to enable increased acoustic complexity and a greater sense of presence in both VR and non-VR. However, obviously that is extremely sort of like, you know, the cliff notes of the cliff notes kind of thing, but basically it is kind of making sound a bit more real, as if you were actually hearing the real sound, if that makes any sense. Obviously you've got echoes, sound bounces of objects, stuff like that. So that's the kind of stuff that we're talking about here. So you got, you know, it's kind of simulating the fact that, okay, the sound isn't just going in a straight line from the sound source to your ear, it's bouncing off a rock on the way there, and then it's also bouncing off a tree or whatever. So you kind of get what I'm saying, you know. So the sound, where you hear sound directly from the TV is also not how you'd hear it if you were hearing that sound in real life, is basically what I'm saying. So again, go give the link in the description of read, because it is really, really cool and actually really interesting for VR in particular, because it's all about that immersion. But even for non-VR applications, having really nice sound is always good. Like, you know, a really nice set of speakers can really help bring a game alive. And, you know, bit of 7.1 going on. You know, it's adds an extra level of coolness. You know, it's not necessarily necessary. That was a bit of a tongue twister of a word, or phrase rather, but it is cool. And obviously a lot of tech is like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we did this? And everyone's like, yeah, actually, alright, I'm down. Anyway, let's move on to our final topic, which is regarding loot boxes. Not really any need for any backstory on this one, is there? Loot boxes have gained infamy over the last few months, and to be honest, it's well deserved. Mostly thanks to EA, but, you know, let's not put it completely at their door. This obviously has been around for quite some time, before Star Wars Battlefront 2, both in and outside of the mobile space. But that game was undoubtedly the cause of various governments looking into whether or not loot boxes are gambling. So, Belgium kicked off an investigation last year, which obviously I have reported, and now Sweden is looking into whether or not loot boxes do constitute gambling. Now, I do have a bit of a comment here from the Swedish Minister of Civil Affairs, who is a fellow by the name of Ardalan Shekarabi, and he basically said that he's going to be asking the authorities to take a closer look at loot boxes and to see if there is a need for their current legislation to have a bit of an update. He said, quote, "We are working to regain control of the gaming market as soon as possible and ensure that Swedish consumer protection rules apply to all actors involved in gaming. I would like to start by asking authorities and experts to look into this. Obviously, there are many people stuck in a game abuse and also end up in this kind of gambling and lose money on it." Now, as is the case with a lot of gambling laws, both here in the UK and, of course, in the US, the reason they don't already fall under gambling is, even though in my personal opinion they are gambling, they don't fall legally under gambling in a lot of places, because there isn't a real-world value thing to be gained from these loot boxes. You know, it doesn't spit out the item into your room or whatever. It's just a digital good. Obviously, that has value to you as a person, and obviously, in some cases, it has actual monetary value where those skins can be sold on a third-party website. But in most cases, it is just like, hey, you're gambling for a digital thing rather than a physical thing like money or tokens or whatever. So there are obviously a lot of discussions going on, a lot of important rooms within governments at the moment as to whether or not their legislation does need to be updated. Personally, I would say yes. You know, I do not want overly aggressive, I guess is the word I'm looking for, their government sort of intervention with this. However, I do think they need to be recognised as gambling, because they are. They give you the same response in your brain. Your brain does not really know the difference between, you know, digital and physical in terms of, like, you know, I'm gambling for a thing that I want and I get a rush if I win the thing that I want. That is exactly the same if it's, you know, you're sitting in front of a slot machine or if you're sitting there playing, you know, CSGO or whatever. So personally, in my personal opinion, it is gambling, but obviously I'm not a lawmaker by any means, or, you know, I'm not here on YouTube's because I'm a lawyer, so, you know, do take that with a grain of salt and all that, but I think it should be updated. I don't want to get too overzealous with it, as I already said, but some information to the customer is always good, you know, just put a little notice saying, hey, this contains gambling, you know, that that little sort of stuff, and also making sure that they can't be too overly predatory with it as well. By they, I mean publishers, of course. However, I'm not going to turn this video into a rant about loot boxes, because Lord knows I've talked about it too much over the last few months. But, you know, it's an important topic, it needs to be discussed, and it does keep raising its head because, you know, as I just said, it's important, and it's not going anywhere anytime soon. So, anyway, that is me done for this video. Thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.